Comrades, fighters, commissars, and compatriots, what this means is that if each and every voter of the EFF in 2019 can convince just 5 voters between now and the next general election to vote for the EFF will receive more than 10 million votes, and that is decisive victory. Consolidation of the ground means that we should turn the quantity of voters we have into quality, and this will in turn become greater quantities. Consolidating means that all our members, ground forces, and voters must be able to politically and ideologically reproduce themselves. Consolidating means that each and every ward in South Africa should have a functional branch of the EFF with no less than 20 volunteers in each and every voting district. Consolidating means that all ground forces of the EFF should be trained ideologically and politically, because, as Thomas Sankara said, that a soldier without proper ideological and political training is a potential criminal. Consolidation means that against threats of being fired from job, against threats of isolation from churches, against threats of isolation from families, fighters and ground forces of the EFF must stay firm behind the struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime. Consolidating means that the sub-regional, regional, and provincial programs of the EFF are of maximum quality even when the national leadership of the EFF is not involved in those programs. We do all these things because we are preparing for a future socialism. We have a global crisis of inequality, poverty, and unemployment, all as a direct result of capitalist greed. The wars that are taking place are as a result of capitalism and capitalist greed. The subdivision of Africa into small incapable states is as a result of capitalism and capitalist greed. The spread of diseases and the isolation of Cuba's superior medical intervention, including vaccinations, is as a result of capitalism and capitalist greed. Our continued suffering and landlessness is as a result of capitalism and capitalist greed. That is why, comrades, fighters, and commissars, we should build a socialist future. We carry an obligation as this generation to build a socialist future. And anyone who wants to associate with us on the African continent and the diaspora should know that our commitment is to socialism. We, as we said in the National Assembly on what is to be done, and in the First National People's Assembly, the EFF is a Marxist, Leninist, Fanonian movement in character because we are primarily in pursuit of a class struggle in a neo-colonial political setting. A Marxist, Leninist, Fanonian character of the EFF is fundamental to the socialist revolution, which the EFF is in pursuit of. The Marxist-Leninist perspective constitutes the correct path towards attainment of the 7 cardinal pillars, which are socialist in character and form. The EFF does not want to impose what Karl Marx called Barak's communism, with forced collectivism, disrespect for individual rights. Comrades, the socialist project that we pursue does not mean that all people will be wearing the same clothes, walking the same way, and doing exactly the same thing on the directive of a powerful bureaucracy that disrespects human rights. We are not going to dance for the same. The EFF does not ascribe to the oppression of anyone and will not, in the socialist transformation of society, cling to one-party state and cult of personalities, because history has cogently illustrated that such undermines the freedom and rights of the very same people the revolution seeks to liberate. The EFF does not ascribe to personality cults. Hence, we object to the idea of naming places after us as individual leaders and activists of economic freedom. We say so because socialist projects and programs across the world were largely associated with individuals, and that is not what we are fighting for. Socialism is not some huge bureaucracy that disregards the rights and freedom of individuals. Socialism does not mean the state or government ownership. It is not a society where private, non-exploitative property, such as houses, cars, and clothes, will commonly be shared. Socialism is about ending private ownership of the means of production. It's about ending the private ownership of mines, farms, and monopoly industries. Socialism does not do away with personal, non-exploitative property. It does away with private property owned by individuals and used to make profit, for example, factories and banks. People will be able to have and cultivate personal property like cars, TVs, and houses. Socialism, to us, primarily means that we should collectively develop the productive forces and make sure that all people have equal access to economic sustainability and have basic needs. The commanding heights of the economy should not be privately owned, and a state led by the working class should be able to provide free, compulsory and quality education, free water and sanitation, free quality housing and electricity, free health and treatment of diseases, development that benefits everyone, not few people, democracy, human rights, peace and stability, creation of state bank to assist cooperatives and SMMEs, restitution of land to the people as a whole, and provision of agricultural support to small-scale farmers. This is a huge struggle we will win, but major steps should be pursued towards victory of a socialist objective. We should all desist from undermining our ideological tools of analysis because it will undermine the cohesion and the coherence of the EFF. Without proper ideological tools of analysis, we will go nowhere and will only be concerned with common and current affairs issues. Chess. We have to do all the above things in our quest for economic freedom in our lifetime. Comrades, fighters, commissars, and compatriots, the economic freedom we are fighting for refers to economic emancipation. Economic emancipation means that we will be able to own and control our own economies, because since colonialism, we have not been able to reclaim the economy. Economic freedom means that the productive forces will be fully developed for everyone. Economic freedom is equal access to the land for residential, commercial, and agricultural purposes. Economic freedom means free quality education for all. Economic freedom means access to quality health care for all. Economic freedom means decentralized development and actual capacity to build new cities. Economic freedom means increased intra-African trade and increased infrastructure that will connect the entire African continent. The economic freedom means massive industrial capacity to produce everything that we need. Economic freedom means high technological capacity to properly fit into the world of increased technological dependence. Economic freedom means the dignity of all people. This is the economic freedom we are fighting for, and will achieve economic freedom in our lifetime. Fellow fighters, the journey that we have traveled is one that requires us to record our own history. Our movement and our movement story is one that we must guard jealously, so that one day it can be known that a generation of brave Africans dared to fight back against imperialism. It is only loyal members of our movement who can tell our story, and we must never at any point in time allow ourselves to be defined by our enemies. We must define ourselves. We must tell our story so that no one can use the name of economic freedom fighters for anything that is not in defense of the hopes and the dreams of African society. Fellow fighters, we must never forget where we come from. We must never forget that we are the product of dreams, the sweat and the blood of the miners and domestic workers. There are many today who forget that our movement did not come as a desire of the few, but that this movement for economic freedom was born from the cries of the exploited masses of our people. Fellow fighters, we are children of Marikana. It is a product of a demands by workers on the Platinum Belt in the mines of South Africa. This movement for economic emancipation was born out of the bravery of those who dared to stand up to the original imperialists who extract the wealth of our land while exploiting the sons and daughters of Africa. Our movement was born as a response to injustice. It was born as a response to the long silence of a liberation movement that lost its revolutionary character at the hands of capital. It was after extensive consultation with various activists from the country through meetings, letters, social media, and other platforms that forces of economic freedom throughout the country gathered on the 26th to the 27th of July 2013 under the Leninist theme of what is to be done. This question came about as we assessed that the material condition in the country for our people were becoming worse, and that former liberation movement could not be trusted to take the struggle of our people forward. As young people in the country, we witnessed unemployment rising, the bulk of economy remaining in the hands of the white minority, and the exploitation of workers coming at the hands of both whites capitalists in collaboration with the ruling party. It was therefore in this assembly themed to what is to be done that it was resolved that the leftist alternative must be built, one that will establish itself as a weapon of the people towards a socialist change. This movement, which consists of community activists, students, sectoral formation, workers, and the general mass of our people, will subsequently establish structures from branches to provinces, regions, and nationally, and contest its first national elections in 2014. This socialist alternative differed then and continue to differ to this day with any other organization that emerged post-1994 dispensation because of the ideals it founded itself on. These are the ideals captured in the 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars of the EFF, which exist as a programmatic agenda for economic freedom in our lifetime. These foundations of the EFF, grounded on mass-based consultation and establishment of core principles, are central to the perseverance and consistency of our organization. It is this principle that continue to guide the EFF, and it is for this reason that we have been able to avoid compromise. To those early days were the backdrop of growth that saw us record just over 1 million votes in our first participation in national general elections in 2014. Since then, our history is one that is rooted in an aggressive war against capital and corruption. We launched an aggressive campaign with a March for Economic Freedom in 2015. This saw us confronting the South African Reserve Bank, Chamber of Mines, and the Johannesburg Stock Exchange combined, sending a shock to the very foundation of white monopoly capital. It was the women of the EFF who marched in their thousands, demanding that there be a review of how the courts and police stations handle cases related to gender-based violence in South Africa. In KwaZulu-Natal, it is the EFF that has led mass protests against political killings in the province that has one of the highest politically motivated killings in the world. It is us fighters who have attended every court case of every racist that has either put our people in coffins, has shot our children in farms, and harmed our children in toilets. It was the students of the EFF who, in institutions of higher learning across the country, championed the struggle for free education, which the former liberation movement had long abandoned. Cheers. Comrades, it was the students of the EFF who, in various institutions of higher learning, achieved victories that trade union had failed to achieve and ensured the insourcing of workers, a critical pillar of abolishing the tender system as enshrined in the cardinal pillars of the EFF. It was a well-recorded fact that the emergence of the EFF in national parliament, an institution which the EFF continued to bring its protest character, has brought efficiency to that arena. The EFF has turned what was once an institution that did not exist in the interest of the majority of South Africans into one that is held accountable and relevant to the daily struggles of our people. Our history and DNA has been guided by the ideals of our founding manifesto. It was the EFF that exposed the billions lost to profit shifting, base erosion, and the tax avoidance by white corporates in South Africa. It was the EFF that revealed capture of party with the former president. It is through the consistent pressure of our organization that expensive independent power producers were revealed as a money-making scheme for the capitalists at the expense of the state and taxpayers. This is our history, and those who say they do not know the role of the EFF in South Africa, in the South African society, are bitter liars. As an organization, we have been guiding the legislative processing of Parliament since our inception. This has been through the drafting of bills and motions that are in line with the ideals captured in our 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars. Although we have not been given an opportunity to govern, we have used our leverage in various municipalities and even in Parliament to pass legislation that will drastically change the lives of our people. In Tshwane, Johannesburg, and Port Elizabeth, we have successfully lobbied councils into insourcing security and cleaning staff, resulting in material benefits such as increased wages, medical provision, and improved working conditions for our people. In Parliament, after many attempts, the ruling party eventually gave in and voted our motion to amend Section 25 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa to allow the expropriation of land without compensation. This is the first cardinal pillar of the EFF, which is set to be implemented before we even govern. Fellow fighters, we must never allow rich history to be written for us. We must never allow our rich history to be written for us. We must never allow ourselves to be erased from history when we have victories to speak about in our short existence. Today, as the country faces darkness due to a collapsing ESCOM, it is the EFF that provided a comprehensive solution to securing the power utility. The solution we have provided do not involve privatization, which will lead to a loss of the little control the state has over strategic sectors of our economy. We continue to fight bitterly against the capture of our state institution, especially by white monopoly capital, which has captured the state president and is deliberately sabotaging our economy so that it can take what is left of our sovereignty. It is our history to fight against injustice, corruption, and capture of our country. It is in our history to fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. Our history of being rooted in the struggles of our people. It is what makes the EFF sustainable. This is what the EFF as an organization of the people and the last hope for those who are hopeless. It is this selfless attitude and approach that members of the organization must not abandon. Comrades, fighters and commissars, compatriots, we as the generation of economic freedom fighters are capable of leading society into socialist future. In just 6 years of existence, we have achieved more victories for for the working class and for the people of South Africa, more than any other political party. The organizational report by our good SG will give a detailed account of the achievement of the EFF in the current term of office. But these are some of the achievements. The EFF motion on the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution was adopted on the 27th of February 2019 and started a process which included wide-ranging consultational review committee, consultations and tabling of report that agreed that there should be amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution to permit for expropriation without compensation. The EFF motion of no confidence against the former president formed the basis of all deliberations and discussions that culminated in him resigning as President of the Republic of South Africa, bringing to an end the rule by criminal syndicate that had gained control of key state institutions. The EFF has made politics popular, in particular Parliament. More people now watch Parliament channel than ever before. Chairs. It's too much. The EFF called the former president to pay back the money spent on non-security related upgrades at his home state. The EFF championed parliamentary debate in solidarity with peace must fall activists and called for the release of all those who were arrested and suspended from institutions of higher learning. The EFF supported those who were involved in court cases, those who were awaiting trial in prison, and those who continue to be sentenced. The EFF protected the independence of the Office of Public Protector. We don't start now. We started when Tuli was there and we're continuing. The EFF introduced secret ballot in Parliament as a method of holding the sitting president accountable. The EFF used its parliamentary participation to table the following laws or initiated a process to draft the following bills which will change the economic design of South Africa to benefit ordinary South Africans. The National Health Amendment Bill, which will ensure that all clinics in South Africa are open 24 hours. The Insourcing of All Government and State Entities Bill, which will result in the insourcing of all workers who provide constant services to government and state companies. The illegalization of alcohol advertisement, which will end the celebration and promotion of alcohol consumption in South Africa as if it's a cool thing. The nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank Bill, which will discontinue private ownership of the central bank. The EFF made substantial policy submission on base erosion, tax avoidance, and profit shifting, and transformation of the financial services sector. The EFF in Johannesburg tabled motion that got more than 7,000 workers insourced as full-time employees, and all of them had their salaries increased from 2,500 to above 7,000 per month with full employment benefits. The EFF Student Command, working with the EFF, got more than 100,000 students registered in many universities through the walk-ins campaign and Sofunda Ngenkani program we undertook in 2018. The EFF caucus in Free State Provincial Legislature exposed Estina Frede dairy farm corruption and maladministration. The EFF caucus tabled a motion of land expropriation without compensation, which was adopted and has led to the farm release program of the Ekurhuleni Metro, a program that gives farmers the opportunity to lease land owned by the state for farming purposes. EFF caucus in the provincial legislature tabled a motion to ban labor brokers, and it was adopted by the House. Most importantly, we have been able to build a national organization represented by the fact that we exist in more than 90% of wards in South Africa and have councillors in 84% of municipalities in all provinces. We are represented in all legislatures, and we are an opposition in official opposition in 3 provinces. The EFF is the only major political organization that grew significantly between 2014 and 2019. Which this means, comrade, is that we carry the necessary political, ideological, and organizational capacity to carry the struggle for socialism forward. It is the character of the EFF to defend those who cannot defend themselves, and for being able to do this in an environment which is hostile to our ideas. I salute you, fighters. Cheers. Comrades, the EFF is the only opposition political party in South Africa's parliament that has built legislative capacity, meaning that we are able to write bills which are deliberated upon in parliament, and some will be adopted as acts of parliament. Amongst the bills we have written are the Banks Amendment Bill, which was hijacked by the National Treasury, which introduced a Financial Matters Amendment Bill, which makes it possible for the state to establish and own banks. Before the EFF got to parliament, the state was not permitted by law to own banks. Now, because of the EFF, the state can own banks. In the immediate, the South African Post Office should apply for a commercial banking license for the Post Bank and the African Bank. The state should own 75% of the African Bank and provide 25% to real black business, not mediocre and chance takers. We have also introduced legislation on the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank, because it is one of the few banks that has private and foreign shareholders in the world. For true economic sovereignty, South Africa should discontinue private shareholders from the South African Reserve Bank, and the EFF will provide a legislative framework for such to happen. It is false and misleading claiming that discontinuation of private shareholders in the Reserve Bank will lead to compensation in billions of rand to private shareholders. This is because the dividends that are distributed by the Reserve Bank do not exceed 200,000 annually. So it is not possible for anyone to claim or demand compensation of billions of rands on an asset that were never going to earn them any billion in their lifetime. We, as the leadership of the EFF, understand the concerns of many people have over the current government's ownership, control and mismanagement of strategic assets and entities. The reality is that the current administration is deliberately sabotaging state-owned companies so that they can sell them to their friends, since they will soon lose power and control to the EFF. State-owned companies are very important strategic drivers of economic growth and activity, and they should be properly managed to achieve such. The importance of South African Airways, for instance, is not just about domestic travel. National airlines are used as mechanism of boosting tourism into the countries that own those airlines. State-owned airlines such as Turkish Airlines, Emirates, and Qatar Airways play an important role in boosting tourism into their countries. And tourism is one of the most important contributory factors to economic growth. South African Airways must not be sold to anyone, because the bidders will be foreign companies which will not care about the strategic importance of a national airline. Those who assess the importance of SAA on superficial balance sheet are short-sighted. Eskom is in crisis. We want Eskom in its entirety, from generation, transmission, and distribution, to be owned by the state. Transnet must not be sold to anyone. Instead, participation of private sector in ports of entry should be limited and ultimately abolished. For national security purposes, for state must have exclusive control of all ports of entry and terminals. The Oppenheimer's Fireblade terminal must be nationalized. The Rupert's and Bisver's control of ports of entry in their harbors must be abolished. Importantly, comrades, the South African government must establish highly skilled and supported state asset supervisory council, which will demand monthly operational, technical, and financial reports of all the key state companies. In this way, we will avoid a state where state-owned companies enter into unmanageable levels of debt. The establishment of a state-owned pharmaceutical company is long overdue. The South African government must form strategic partnership with Cuba to build adequate pharmaceutical capacity here in South Africa and in Cuba. All these objectives can be achieved once our organization takes political power. But we need to get the basics right. We are on the correct path to power, but we should never be complacent. Our victories should not blind us to the many challenges that confront the organization. This includes the fact that the EFF is not yet fully established in all corners of South Africa, with branches and revolutionary activists who understand and are passionate about a mission. The EFF does not have councillors in 24 municipalities, and this should change in 2021 local government. Many branches do not have programs of action and do not meet regularly to decide on the work that must be pursued to win over the masses to the struggle for economic freedom. The EFF CCT committees are not fully functional, and despite being assigned to specific tasks, most commissars sitting in front here do not do anything in relation to their CCT portfolios. We must not lie. Chairs. A substantial number of EFF leaders, mostly those deployed in positions of responsibility, are not loyal to the EFF, but loyal to their positions of deployment. You must note that. You must note this one. Let me repeat it. A substantial number of EFF leaders, mostly those deployed in positions of responsibility, are not loyal to the organization, but loyal to their positions of deployment. You are going to see it. You are going to see it when this conference finishes. Some of them are not going to be elected, and they are going to start insulting the organization after not being elected. The EFF has not built adequate internal capacity to win municipal ward-based elections. This is a huge challenge in light of the fact that municipal elections are partially ward-based. We need to build capacity to win wards and win municipalities. The EFF does not own the buildings it uses as offices at all levels, and the leadership that will be elected here must be mandated to own all its offices. Not all CCTs, PCTs, RCTs, and BCT members can articulate EFF vision and standpoint with clarity. It is so disappointing that you have a national leader of the EFF who can articulate EFF vision and standpoint on anything with clarity. I hope this conference will not use the CCT as a dumping area for mediocre. You must provide us with the best of the best. While established, a lot of branches do not meet consistently and do not lead community struggles. That's why when there are by-elections, you don't win wards, because most of you are not known to your communities. And when we campaign for you, they say, "Who is this one?" Most regional structures are directionless, and do not have the necessary impact expected from EFF structures. Most provincial leaders do not know the length and breadth of their provinces, and PCTs do not meet from time to time as is expected of them. Regions do not meet consistently and have no mechanism to consistently monitor the work of branches. Branches are not fully functional, not engaged in any form of program, and majority of them only meet when there is either election or assemblies are approaching. The EFF Student Command has not gained a life of its own. It remains heavily dependent on EFF mother body to carry out its daily and constitutional functions. I never said the EFF Student Command must be dissolved. I challenge them to be a biting tool for the young people of South Africa. Comrades, we carry the obligation to be honest when assessing our capacity so that we can provide remedies and strengthen the organization for the future. The EFF sets the agenda in South Africa and the entire African continent. The whole of South Africa is engaged in the discussion of the land question because of the EFF. In our struggle for socialist economic freedom, our primary focus is the land question, and this is consistent with our ideological tools of analysis. When outlining the vision of a socialist future, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels said in the Communist Manifesto, and I quote, "These measures will of course be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable." I close quote. Abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purpose. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. The bringing into cultivation of wasteland and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. Combination of agriculture with manufacturing industries, gradual abolition of all the distinction between town and country by more equal distribution of populace over the country, and free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production. These are part of the 10 demands which were adopted by the League of the Just in 1884, and they are all still applicable today. In South Africa, the landlessness of the black majority and Africans in particular is as a result of colonialism and later on apartheid. As we speak, the colonial settlers own and control more than 70% of land in South Africa, and these numbers are the same for all former colonial territories. South Africa's land size is 122 million hectares or 1.2 million square kilometers. Under colonialism and apartheid, black people only own and control 16 million hectares of the 122 million hectares, making it only 13% of South Africa's land surface. Post-democratic South Africa owns 17 million hectares of land. South African National Parks administers 4 million hectares, and the other hectares are administered by the state, including by institutions such as Ingonyama Trust, which administer the land that is essentially state-owned, public works, municipalities, DTI, forestry, and some productive farms. The land can be used for agricultural purposes. The land that can be used for agricultural purposes in South Africa is 37 million hectares. And according to the land audit issued in 2017, whites own 26 million hectares, or 72% of that total 37 million hectares farms. And agricultural holdings by individual landowners, followed by colored people who own just over 5 million hectares. or 15% Indians who own over 2 million hectares, or 5% Africans who own just over 1 million hectares. Africans are more than 80% of the population in South Africa, but collectively own less than 5% of agricultural land. To properly locate the EFF position on the land question, let us pay some attention to the part of the land that is owned by the state. Although being a minority owner of land, the state owns some parts of the land through national, provincial, and local government level and departments. And most of this land is land that was previously owned by Bantustan. In various instances, the state is the custodian of less than 17% of South Africa's land and has issued this to different users for different purposes. The state is the custodian of water and minerals, and it should be the custodian of the land with guaranteed security of tenure. A policy position that seeks to expropriate land piece by piece will not work in South Africa and will not solve the huge land inequalities that exist between black people and white people. In the 25 years of democracy, the ruling party has only bought 10% of the land from white colonial settlers because of their willing buyer, willing seller approach. What this means is that in 50 years of democracy, only 20% of land will be bought. And in 100 years, since 1994, only 40% of land will have been bought. We as a generation should refuse to be trapped in the gradualism of former liberation movement, which lacks capacity and political courage to take back the land. Let us dismiss the policy position of all other right-wing political parties, which include the former liberation movement in power, which says the solution is distribution of title deed. The position basically says that the government will come contribute pieces of papers in areas where black people are staying without relocating them to any other area. If you have doubts that the policy of distributing title deeds is part of the establishment policies, just look at the fact that Johan Rupert was personally distributing title deeds to informal settlement dwellers in Stellenbosch municipalities. And recently, Investec was doing the same in Soshanguve. These two are part of South Africa's white and racist capitalist establishment, and they are creating a false sense of ownership by distributing pieces of papers and not distributing land, which is our primary target. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we will not guarantee security of tenure on those who use the land. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we are going to take people's homes and houses and will never abolish children's rights to inherit their parents' houses. Our position on state custodianship of land does not mean that we are going to collect rentals of land users in the same way some traditional leaders are doing. Our position on land question represents superior logic, and any other form of land redistribution will not even scratch the surface on land inequalities in South Africa. Chairs, Commissars and compatriots, our country is in crisis. It is a man-made crisis. The economy of South Africa is not growing, and this means that the revenue the state collects to provide basic services will decline. The country's debt to the GDP ratio is approaching 70% of the GDP, and government is spending more than 200 billion paying for the debt services. Unemployment is at its highest form, and this unemployment affects black people because white people's unemployment is less than 7%, while the unemployment rate of black people is more than 40%. Our country is not guaranteed consistent and dependable supply of electricity. Our public transport infrastructure and services are not improving. Informal settlement dwellers are swept away by heavy rains and immediately become homeless. Our people are dying from preventable diseases, and this applies to black people. The life expectancy of black people is less than that of white people in South Africa by 15 years. All these socio-economic problems are happening while the white capitalist establishment is celebrating the election of their puppet as a president. White supremacists are comfortable and happy under the current administration because their puppet is now in office and is marginalizing African leadership in all strategic sectors of the economy and government. All these social ills are happening while the cabal continues to use illegal intelligence to publicly persecute political opponents. Black professionals are being marginalized not only in the private sector, but also in key public-owned companies. There is a huge wage gap between white and black people. White people earning 3 times more than black people. South Africa is currently the most unequal society in the whole world, with less than 10 billionaires who control wealth that is more than the wealth of 26 million people. We still have people with disability that do not have houses in South Africa, and government has a list of almost all people with disability because majority receives disability grants. In the same way we give them grants, we should prioritize them. We should prioritize people with disability for provision of houses and essential because they are special people. We still have areas in South Africa without running water and electricity. We still have racist farmers who abuse our brothers and sisters in farm, evict them as and when they wish to do so. The current administration is not just incompetent, they are also very dangerous. From this NPA, we should engage in militant programs to oppose the attempt to incapacitate and therefore sell state-owned companies. When the previous administration tried to undermine our country through the corrupt family criminal syndicate, we did everything in our power to remove their puppet, and it is evident now that he was replaced with a more dangerous capitalist establishment, which is working in alliance with all white political organizations. We carry the obligation to remove this sitting government from political power because they are failing dismally. We should send a strong caution that if the current administration hands over power to unelected people, their president, like the former president, will not finish his term of office. We have said on several occasions that we have not elected families to lead this country, and will never allow families to run this country. It is on these grounds that we should understand state failure over the past few years, particularly destroyed by corruption, nepotism, and cadreship deployment. A post-colonial state everywhere in the world have been confronted by twin challenges of economic inequality and corruption. There is a strong relationship between the inability of the post-colonial state to lead economic growth that is characterized by massive sustainable jobs on one hand and kleptocracy that leads to the state failure and general collapse of the state. Our own situation is not different. Since 1994, we have experienced moments of sustainable but jobless growth, particularly between 2001 and 2004. This is happening while inequality between black and white are widening. The ruling party has presided over a false macroeconomic policy which was based on a misdiagnosis of South African capitalism. They assumed they could implement solutions in South Africa that are cooked in Europe experiences. When the economy offers little job opportunities, the state becomes the only employer in the long run. Yet since its very inception, the post-apartheid state never prioritized merit. People are employed because they are relatives of politicians or they have bribed officials to get a job. People get business with the state from national to local government through corrupt means. As a result, because merit with in institutions without technical skills required to do so. At local government level, there is massive paralysis that has led to the collapse of basic services like water, roads, schools, sanitation, and housing. South Africa is a country that can deliver world-class infrastructure in just few years to host the world's biggest sporting tournament, the FIFA World Cup, yet fails to eliminate pit toilets from rural schools. Nothing is more exemplary of a failed state than the state of health in our country. People go to hospital to die, not to get medical improvements. Health in South Africa is on its knees. There is no equipment or medication. There is overcrowding, which has resulted in the impossibility of these hospitals ever remaining clean as centers of medical care. Today, a hospital is dirty and under-serviced as a taxi rank. In fact, even the treatment of patients who queue in lines to receive medical attention are addressed the same way disdained the taxi marshals address passengers in taxi rank. The introduction of the national health insurance is small, suspicious steps forward. However, without equal attention to equipping public hospitals with machinery, the country will simply surrender to the draconian pricing method of private health care. The implementation of NHI has to be parallel with an aggressive regulation of pricing in the insurance industry and hospitals in general. In addition, we must ensure that a state-owned pharmaceutical company is fully developed and supported to avoid buying medical drugs from private sector. The Assembly will notice that when it comes to pharmaceuticals, patent laws are going to be a big problem in the manufacturing and generation of many drugs and medicine. A truly new global patent order has to be inaugurated in the medical and pharmaceutical sector. Surely, it is time the world accept that we should not be making money out of saving people's lives, particularly on diseases probably created by the same pharmaceutical companies seeking profit. Fellow fighters, our very last cardinal pillar speaks of open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without any fear of victimization by the state agencies. In this country, there is only accountability for opponents of the incumbent. There is very little rule of law. If by the rule of law we mean classic and principled idea that we must all be equal before the law, then in South Africa some are more equal than others. Most importantly, in the recent past, our judiciary has not exercised the same strictness and coldness we saw when they were dealing with the constitutional delinquent in the form of the former president. Our judiciary is, however, not completely lost, and thanks to the people like Chief Justice Mogoeng, who are still loyal to the land and not to the incumbent. Chairs. It does not mean that we will not disagree with Mogoeng in future. And disagreement does not mean that we want to do away with the judiciary. Tomorrow when we criticize Mogoeng, those with a mind the size of a peanut should not say we are wishy-washy. We will be criticizing his judgments like we always do. But it doesn't mean that Mogoeng is not a man of honor and integrity. When it comes to that, you will never fault our Chief Justice. We must continue to challenge the judiciary to remain fair, to treat everyone equally and in the same way. We need them to always be above politics and ideological differences. They must speak law, nothing else but law. The most important question to a judge is, what does the law say, not how I feel? No. The day they descend into any other terrain which is not law, they will lose confidence and betray the very idea of supremacy of the law. The doctrine of the rule of law also means that judges too are subject to the rule of law. No one, not even them as officers of the court, are above the law. It does not matter what they think of whoever appears in front of them. They may not like this person, but what they are obliged to do is administer justice and justice, not choose the color, the weather, the season, or who is in front of them, whether it's a president or a minister or a leader of an opposition party. It doesn't matter. The question all the time, judges, is, what does the law say? Justice is justice no matter the condition. It must be the same to all. Even when they act in commissions of inquiry, judges must inspire confidence and independence of the administration of justice. When we appear in front of them, all of us, rich or poor, suspect or victim, must feel safe that we will get a fair hearing and treatment. That is why we have defended the public protector from the recent onslaught against her office. Judges must deal with each report on its merit. They cannot treat all reports the same because they are not the same. Like many judges, the public protector will get the law wrong. Like magistrate, she may even show some incompetency. Yes, the court must point those out in relation to specific reports in front of them. But once she has written a solid report pointing to abuse of power, they must affirm her. They must help that office to have the necessary biting teeth against the powerful it is charged with investigating. They must not make it easy for those who are powerful to simply ignore, suspend, or override her remedial actions. There cannot be protection of the office on the basis of who occupies it. It must at all times be treated as an office whose power and existence flow directly from the supreme law of the land, the Constitution. Commissars, we should know that the enemy forces, white monopoly capital, and its representatives will fight back because our program seeks to take over from them. The enemy forces will use the media and state institutions to persecute and prosecute the leadership of the EFF because they realize and know that our program will bring about quality, and they do not want equality. The capitalist establishment will use everything in their power, including intelligence services, the banks, and everything to persecute the leadership of the EFF. Comrades, in South Africa, the banks are more powerful than any other institution. The democratic dispensation has surrendered power of our people into the hands of banks. And these banks are used by the owners of the means of production to go after those they disagree with. We need to zoom into these banks. The banks can never be powerful than the will of the people. The banks can never decide the direction our country takes. The people should decide which direction our country takes. We should pay a specific attention in this assembly on these banks because they are now law unto themselves. The enemy forces will also try to break the unity of the organization by planting agent provocateurs who will use the same script of white monopoly capitalist media to speak badly about the leadership. We should refuse to be defined by white monopoly capital and their representatives. One of the mandates from this assembly should be that the leadership should build and strengthen alternative communication and media platforms that communicate to all South Africans directly. The advances in technology gives us direct access to the people on a daily basis and in real time without depending on media platforms, most of whom are hunting dogs of factions of the ruling party and domestic and global capitalist establishments. Media freedom is guaranteed. They are here. They wanted to be here. They wanted to have 600 delegates, more than 3 provinces combined. That's why they've got their own allocation, seats and table. They are delegates. Delegates from the media. Chairs, media. Media freedom is guaranteed for genuine media, but those whose proclaimed agenda is to destroy the EFF must be isolated. Our constitutional right of association is also a right not to associate with representatives of enemy forces. Fellow fighters, no other institution in South African democratic society has been more manipulative, embedded, abused, and abusive as the media, or to be more precise, South African media. As the second MPA, we must indeed reaffirm our commitment to defend the independence of the media and its necessity in a democracy, particularly in the work of holding those who are powerful accountable. We need well-qualified journalists. We need seasoned journalists who will not seek to impress their white masters. Let me give you an example. Yesterday in a press conference, a stupid journalist asked a stupid question. He says to the TG, "How much did you spend here? And how much did the liquidated VBS," this is not in my report, "how much did the liquidated VBS pay?" Just listen to a foolish question. Liquidated and payments. How can a liquidated company pay? Domkop. Why bonor neko pisa skolomie? Liquidated company and making payments. How? Come on, man. Go and revise your books of journalism. Journalism 101. Please. Don't be scared of books. You must read. Don't ask clever questions, quality questions. We want you to ask questions, not mediocre. That every time you raise your hand, we know now comes a stupid question. We must further reiterate that we believe in the self-regulation of the media. There must be strengthening of institutions like the Press Ombudsman and the South African Broadcasting Complaint Commission. Inasmuch as media must be independent from the state, business and religious powers, it must, like the rest of us, be held accountable. This is because the media holds social power, the power that can build reputation and destroy them, the power that mask or unmask unjust wars like those in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Libya. They have the power to inform or misinform society, at times to the detriment of people's health, livelihoods, and safety. The accountability mechanism in this country are terribly weak and enjoy no public confidence. In fact, journalists have to worry about the credibility of their work, particularly in light of press values like fair and balanced coverage. Above all, about sensationalism, the art of blowing things out of proportion simply to sell papers or multiply audience. Sensationalism is now the order of the day, starting storms in a teacup against those the media simply declares as enemies of society. No other political party in post-apartheid South Africa has been declared from editorial pages as an enemy than the EFF. South African journalism has to isolate itself and really enter a great introspection about how they think, feel, and report about the EFF. The evidence of their disdain of us is everywhere, and each day it is mounting. We are the first to defend the right of the media to write critically about us, as critically as we challenge the ruling party in Parliament. But we only ask that they speak the truth and isolate Stratcom agents amongst them. South African media, stop being in denial. You are infiltrated by an organized, well-orchestrated, covert intelligence organization which has captured many of your editorial rooms using covertly attained information. Ask how people get to know about the private accommodation of others, get access to their rooms soon after they depart, so as to dig in their dustbin. Ask the rights of those people, are the rights of those people not important to the media? What kind of media project or ethos is being galvanized by ignoring the fact that information could have been attained through intrusive equipment that violates people's rights to human dignity and privacy? Ask what drives a senior, well-seasoned journalist to release the addresses, pictures of residents of those they politically disagree with, despite the fact that these are people belonging to families with children who have rights and have independent social standing. Can a journalist that is litigating against a politician still ethically and confidently say they can cover such a politician with fairness without any conflict of interest? Why are journalists who openly say they belong to political parties still allowed to cover opposition parties? What about conflict of interest? It is a fact today that state security and crime intelligence has many in the editorial rooms on their payroll. People have been long warned about this. Is it not time that you relook into your own systems and ask crucial questions? What can we do to avoid being infiltrated and used by the powerful in the games that they play with other powerful or weak forces? Today, we don't know what you achieve by attacking us. We simply call on you to self-introspect. Fellow fighters, we must challenge the public broadcaster to reimagine itself as a broadcaster of the African continent. If SABC was truly rooted in the continent in terms of stories, music, news, sports, and many other programs, will not have these levels of Afrophobia. The SABC has to actively reintegrate South Africa culturally into the African continent. Comrades, many of us do not know what's happening in the other parts of our continent, because the SABC does not help us to deal with the mindset that was installed in us by the colonialists, that South Africa is actually not in Africa. From Africa, there is something called Africa there is South Africa there. That's why people, when they speak of South Africa, they refer to Africans as if we do not belong to the same continent. There is good music in Nigeria. There's good music in Ghana. There's good music in Mozambique. We don't know it. But people from Ghana, people from Mozambique, people from Zimbabwe know South African music, because all African countries have come to accept that we are one thing. But the SABC, which has got no vision for Africa, is closing out African stories. There's only one journalist in SABC, Sophie Mukwena, who's got interest in the continent. The rest of them, if you were to ask them, where is Sudan on the map? They will never point Sudan on the map because they don't have interest in Africa. It's not only SABC, by the way, the entire delegation here will not know where Sudan is. It is not time to dispense with the digital migration program since it has actually failed due to general incompetence of the current administration. Why is the SABC not pursuing or allowed to pursue and enter in the same space of direct to home which MultiChoice is operating in? Fighters, our primary political program is contained in the EFF founding manifesto, which was adopted as the official political program in Soweto, in the National General People's Assembly on what is to be done. The analysis, the diagnosis, and solution provided for in the founding manifesto are correct and will stand the test of time. Generations of economic freedom fighters to come will look upon the EFF founding manifesto in a similar way communists and socialists look upon the Communist Manifesto. The founding manifesto of the EFF is our primary political program, and the 7 cardinal pillars are the main non-negotiable pillars which will hold this organization together forever. The EFF founding manifesto begins with a caption that of Frantz Fanon, which says, I open quote, "A generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it." I close quote. The EFF represents a generation which has discovered its mission, and we vow that we will never betray our mission. The EFF 7 cardinal pillars constitute the core of our political programs, and we will never retreat from these pillars. Substitution of any of these pillars has a potential to undermine the cohesion of the EFF. The question we should be asking is, what do these 7 cardinal pillars mean in practical terms? Let us remind each other of these pillars of our revolution. 1. Expropriation of South Africa's land without compensation for equal redistribution in use. We have dealt with this land question today, and we can report to this Assembly that we are making progress on amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. 2. Nationalization of mines, banks, and other strategic sectors of the economy without compensation. South Africa is home to more than 50 industrial and precious minerals and metals, and these minerals are not contributing to the economic emancipation of South Africa. Mine workers are treated like slaves and even get killed by the ruling party when they demand better salaries, like it happened in Marikana. We need to nationalize the mines in order to locally beneficiate and industrialize our mineral resources. The law, MPRDA, says that the state should be informed of the minerals leaving the country, and such is not happening. The current administration has gone very far to withdraw the MPRDA because they are scared of the white capitalist establishment. 3. Building state and government capacity, which will lead to the abolishment of tenders. What we currently have in South Africa is a corrupt state incapable of performing its own function. The state cannot build roads, it cannot build power stations, it cannot build railways, it cannot build schools, it cannot build hospitals, it cannot even buy stationery for offices. All these tasks are given to corrupt private companies who bribe state officials and politicians for them to get tenders. We need a state that can are beginning to realize this pillar by pushing for insourcing of certain functions in municipalities. By the time we get to 2021 local government elections, all EFF caucuses should have tabled motions in municipalities legislatures, and Parliament to insource workers. The bill that was introduced in Parliament by the EFF should be passed into Act of Parliament. Free quality education, healthcare, houses, and sanitation. Education in South Africa remains a privilege of the few, and absolute majority of our children cannot gain access, particularly to post-secondary teaching and education. The struggle for free education should be intensified. We take this opportunity to salute the Feast Must Fall generation, which confronted the regime in a militant and uncompromising way, and call on generation of students now to fight until free, quality, and decolonized education is a reality in all universities. Cheers. Five, massive protected industrial development to create millions of sustainable jobs, including introduction of minimum wage in order to close the wage gap, the rich and the poor, close the apartheid wage gap, and promote rapid career path for Africans in the workplace. Majority of consumers of goods and services which we consume and buy from retail stores here in South Africa, plastic products, the electronics such as phones, televisions, sound system, fridges, and many other products are made in other parts of the world. What this means is that we as South Africa are creating jobs for other people in other parts of the world by consuming goods and services that are not made in South Africa. Instead of passing legislation that compels all retail stores to buy locally produced goods and services, the current government is trying to convince ordinary citizens to buy South Africa. How are people going to buy South Africa when there are very few products and services produced in South Africa? We should, in the immediate, table legislation which will make it compulsory for government to spend not less than 80% of the budget on goods and services that are made in South Africa. Government is the single biggest buyer of many goods, and it should use its buying power to drive localization and industrialization. 6, massive development for the African economy and advocating for a move from reconciliation to justice in the entire continent. The economic development of South Africa is interdependent on the development of the entire African economy, where African trade amongst each other and make sure that the development of South Africa should be linked to the development of Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Lesotho, Botswana, DRC, Malawi, Nigeria, and all the countries in the African continent. An illusion that we will become prosperous by closing borders is just an illusion. We carry the obligation to develop the entire African continent. The last pillar, open, accountable, corrupt-free government and society without fear of victimization by the state agencies. We have seen over the recent past that the current government is committed to the protection of corruption by state officials and politicians. Corruption in government starts with the head of the state, who steals public money and uses all institutions, including Parliament, to protect himself from accountability. We, as the EFF, should continue to expose the massive theft of South Africa's resources and must fight against the politicized persecution and prosecution of political opponents. It is only the EFF that can change the conditions by being true to itself and doing everything in its power to achieve the 7 cardinal pillars. While at this, we should clarify that the EFF policies and programs do not say we should nationalize everything, and targeted program is on nationalization of strategic sectors of the economy, and our discussion document on state capacity clarifies this question of what the strategic sectors of the economy are. Must not go around listening to teachers that socialism means when you own a car, you must park it and leave the the key there, and someone else comes and takes the car and drop it somewhere, and someone else comes, and that you will never own an underwear because when you wash it and put it on the fence, someone is going to take it and wear it. That is vulgarization, or that is vulgarizing socialism. So read the founding manifesto of the EFF and the Communist Manifesto. All of those issues are being clarified. ESCOM should remain under the ownership and control of the state and should not be unbundled. Instead of unbundling, ESCOM should develop internal capacity to produce electricity from renewable resources. ESCOM should be capacitated to build adequate and safe nuclear capacity to safeguard electricity supply, and all coal power stations should be improved to limit and unlimitedly eliminate carbon emission, because we associate with green concerns raised around the devastating nature of coal to the environment. Electricity in our age of existence is not luxury, but a basic human right. There must never be a household or public institutions without electricity in South Africa. And the additional capacity we build should be extended to helping with electricity in the entire African continent. The National People's Assembly should deliberate on the phenomenon of the fourth industrial revolution, the rise of the e-commerce in the world. Fellow fighters, it is important not to underscore the phenomenon of the fourth industrial revolution and how this affects or speaks to our program of change. We must do this because one of the most important obligations flowing from our founding manifesto is to lead massive industrial development to the creation of jobs. We will have to design and speak to an industrial strategy that has in mind the global move towards machinery and technology made possible by the 3D printing, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and the Internet of Things. We ought to pay attention to this development for the skills impact they will have, which in turn will affect curriculum in schools and universities. The existence of intelligence robots in mining, farming, manufacturing, and infrastructural development have to be looked into. The impact of nanotechnology is medical diagnosis and treatment of diseases in general, the power of internet programs in banking, the movement of money, and the possible disappearance of paper money or coins. How imminent are these developments to the economic practices our country has today? How immediate steps can be taken to take advantage of them, invest ourselves as a country so we gain expertise and specialization in many of the areas. The first industrial revolution was largely about the steam engine. The second was about electricity and automation. The third was about digital computation and mainly communication technologies, the internet, the computer, and the mobile phones. We are now in the fourth industrial revolution, and it is the era of cyborg, an intelligent, human-looking robot. Perhaps the commitment we must immediately make is to build the factories that will produce these cyborgs. If indeed the cyborgs are upon us, then fighters post the fourth industrial development, we have to rethink wages as a tool for social inclusion if robots will be doing all the work in society. Living will have to be different. An economy will have to be re-intellectualized. But for now, our task is clear. Embrace the technological development and take advantage of them for the total economic emancipation of our people. Artificial intelligence, robotics will fundamentally change the nature of the world. We, as the developing nations, will be the most affected because our hope was on building labor-absorptive industrial capacity. But industries of the future are not going to be labor-absorptive, meaning that industrialization might not create enough jobs to address our unemployment crisis. The other immediate challenge that comes with the new forms of industry and trade is the fact that brick and mortar into virtual stores will threaten the revenue the state collects to deliver basic services. We should build adequate capacity to maximally collect taxes from online trading platforms such as Amazon, Alibaba, and Uber.